Hi, how's it going? So in last month's vlog, as usual, I asked for comments, questions, suggestions. Pleased to say I got some very nice comments in, and also a couple of good questions as well from our members, which I've answered on our member channel. And of course, if you want to get access to all the instructional content on there, just click the join button below and that will show you how. The questions that were asked there were related to some knife work and also taking hits. So those are the current uploads on the member channel. Anyway, aside from all that, I got the usual couple of, less positive comments, let's put it that way. Now, quite often with these, if it's an intelligent question, then fine, I'll do my best to answer it. But quite often it's a one-word comment. I think the word in this case was garbage. I usually just delete these because you look at the profile, the person has no videos up or anything else, then obviously not using their real name. It's a waste of time. But I thought this time I'd just pursue it, so I asked, why is it garbage? This went back and forward for a little bit. We got to a stage where the person said, oh, you don't do any sparring, there's no sparring on your channel. I said, well, I guess you missed the videos called sparring. And the reply was, oh yeah, well, I looked at those and all I saw was a load of guys throwing random punches. It was at this point that I thought, right, this person has obviously not had the same experiences that I have. So what I thought today, first of all, was talk a little bit about those experiences. Now I want to make it clear from the start that the reason I'm doing this is to put things in context, not to say what a terrible upbringing I had or how tough I am of any of that stuff, because I'm distinctly average in pretty much everything. But really it's important when you're talking about, well, anything really, but particularly if you're talking about your training or any activity that you're investing a lot of time in, it's very important to put it into context. And as we know with the way social media is these days, it's very easy to take clips out of context in order to, well, get clicks on your channel or get laughs or whatever it is. So, I was born and raised in East London. I guess I was a teenager in the 70s, really. I was born in 1963, so you can do the maths. 70s into the 80s. And at that time, it was what you might call an interesting place to live. There was a lot of violence. Violence was a very normal, if I can put it that way, a virtually everyday thing. So of course there's the usual stuff you get at school. There's fights in the playground, there's fights with other schools, all that sort of low level stuff. But aside from that, 70s through to the 80s, there was a lot of politics going on as well. So there were protest marches, there were strikes and picket lines. We had the National Front marching through the East End, or trying to march through the East End. Then of course we had all the football stuff going on as well. I was going to most of the West Ham home matches from the age of about, 10 or 11 or 12, I guess. And, we know what that was like. There's that famous saying about, I went to West Ham to watch a fight and a football match broke out. So there was that going on. And aside from that, there was the whole teenage tribe thing. So you had to be like you were a skinhead or a biker or a mod or a punk or a casual or whatever it was. And generally speaking, these different groups didn't mix. Sometimes that was accidental. Other times you'd go away like on a bank holiday weekend, everyone would go to Southend or wherever it was, basically for a punch-up. And aside from all of that, there was a general air, if you went out to a pub or a club or to see a band, there's sort of general air that something could potentially happen at any time. In fact, the very first big gig I went to, which was the Jam at the Rainbow in Finsbury Park, there was a huge fight outside after that, and I believe someone actually got stabbed, unfortunately. So that feeling of violence was always present. Now, some of that we can say was not particularly random, because if you went to certain places and you were part of a certain group, you might expect those things to happen. But at other times, this violence could be surprisingly random as well. And there's one incident in particular that sticks in my mind. I was about 16, I was at a bus stop with my girlfriend. So this would have been about 10 o'clock, half 10 on a weekday night. Ilford Broadway, she lived in Stratford. I'd walk her to the bus stop, see her onto the bus, and that'd be that. So we're standing at the bus stop, and there's maybe 4 or 5 other people standing there or queuing for the bus as well. The bus came along and pulled up, and this was one of the old London buses with the sort of open platform at the back. So the bus pulls up, and these 4 grown men, I mean they were in their late 20s, possibly even 30s, 4 of them jumped off the bus. One of them said, "Who wants some then?" And off it went. They just started laying into the people at the bus stop. The people at the bus stop started fighting back. Tracy and I kind of made our way through this. I saw her onto the bus. I said, "See you tomorrow," and off she went. Walked home. This fight was still going on as I walked off. Now, this didn't make the local news. It didn't make the national news. I didn't really even particularly tell anyone about it. I didn't go home and say, "Oh, there was this huge fight at the bus stop," because this was kind of, well, a regular occurrence. You know, you didn't really think twice about it. A few years after that, I did get into doing some door work around the area. Not a huge amount. I mean, I did enough to let me know that I didn't want to be a doorman for too long. But in any case, that brought other experiences as well. But what I really want to talk about today is this word random. So we had that totally random event at the bus stop, and I guess you can say if you went somewhere with a group of you, it wasn't particularly random in that you knew that violence was likely, but the nature of the violence itself was random. People were throwing, guess what, random punches. So it was about this time that I seriously got involved in martial arts. I'd done some judo and boxing earlier, but at the age of about 17 I started training in Chinese martial arts properly. And the interesting thing was it was quite a traditional approach, lots of stances, lots of eating bitter as they call it, going through the movements one at a time, learning the applications, all that sort of thing. Partly as a way to help to learn to deal with this stuff that was going on around me. Partly, there are other reasons as well. And I suppose I was lucky in that there quite quickly formed a group of us, about half a dozen of us, all from a similar background. And we get together once a week outside of the class and try the stuff out that we were learning, but in the context of our own experiences. Now, I'm going to be talking about different approaches to training and everything else. I'm not really being judgmental here. I'm not saying this is better than that or anything else. But of course, what you have to be sure of is that your training is working for you in the context that you need it to. And if that's the case, if everything is working fine for you and you're happy with it, then great, I don't have any issue with that. Where I take issue is when people come into my space or my YouTube channel, for example, and start telling me things, you know, then you've got to have something to back that up. You can show me something or explain something to me. I'm quite open to that. But otherwise, it's just a lot of empty noise. So, as I said, we were taking our classical Chinese martial arts training, if you like, and we were mixing it up a bit. Very crude. I mean, we had sort of some bag gloves. We didn't really have pads or headgear or any of that stuff. So it was a bit intense at times, but I found it a very good way, and it's something I still like to do to this day with the people who come and train with me. Bring your experiences with you, and we'll see how we can weave those into the training and into what we do. Because if you are training with a focus to real life self-defense, you need to do that, because real life self-defense can be extremely random. I think sometimes in martial arts there is an idea of dueling. Now, again, for certain things that's fine, but to bring that into the world of the sort of football match or whatever it is, you know, one of those situations, to think you can stand and take a stance and say, "I'm ready," and here we go, and you sort of swap these techniques. It's a little bit naive perhaps, because as we know, that environment can turn chaotic very quickly and everything becomes very random. If that is where our interest is in our training, or if it's one of the interests in our training, because you can do training for more than one reason, it's very important to factor this into your practice. How do we do that? Well, in Systema we have a few different ideas. The first thing is that we don't work with set movements. Systema is one of the few arts I know where there's no forms or kata as such. We don't practice solo sets of specific movements as you might see in what people think of as traditional martial arts. Having said that, and I've talked about this before, I see our core exercises, our squats, our sit-ups, our press-ups as a form of kata in many ways, because these are movements you can use to develop the body for a certain practical use. And of course they have other benefits. You're getting stronger, you're getting fitter, you're getting healthier, and so on. So in that sense already, because the system is not style based, when I ask a training partner or a friend to throw a punch, I don't know what sort of punch he's going to throw. Now, if we're looking at something very specific, I might say, oh, can you punch me in the face because I want to demonstrate something on the high line or whatever, you know. But outside of that, certainly when we're mixing it up with what we call free play or different types of sparring, I don't know what type of punch is going to be thrown. If we were working in a stylistic way, it might be that that person's always going to throw a reverse punch or some sort of kung fu technique or whatever it is, because the form, the kata, the style, is based often on this catalogue of techniques. Now, they're going to have principles laid on top of that as well, but primarily they're a catalogue of techniques. Given that, people are going to be working with those techniques. So there we can see a problem, because if we're working style against style all the time and we're working the same style, we get very used to working against the same type of attack and we're using the same type of defence. When we come outside of that environment, suddenly all these random elements come in and we can find ourselves a little bit at sea. The first thing then is when you're doing your work and you play, then try not to be too predictable in how you approach and how you attack your partner. Now, of course, you can also factor into that, well, most people are going to be sort of boxing based or MMA based or whatever it is, so let's get someone who can throw some good hooks and jabs in and learn to work against those specifically. That's fine, but in your own response, there's nothing in the rule book that says if the other person jab, nothing to say you've got to jab back, right? You can do all sorts of other things. So Systema gives you the chance to explore that, because being random doesn't just apply to the other person, you apply it to your own work as well. The best way I've found to do this is not to work in pairs. When we work in pairs, with the best will in the world, we can get very set into that idea of dueling. And as I said again, for some situations, for some things, that's perfectly fine. But when we work in pairs, there's a couple of things. One, our focus can be fixed totally on that other person. Nothing else really matters. Often you might find yourself kind of mirroring the other person. If the person takes a particular stance, then I might take the same sort of stance as well, and we end up doing this trading thing. The best way to break out of that is to work in groups of 3. Now that might be 2 people onto 1, it might be every person for themselves, but of course the more people you add in, then the more the random factor goes up. Not only does this mean you're dealing with more random attacks, but also now you have to spread your awareness out from just that one person in front of you, because you could have a person here. You also start to learn about positioning. If it's 2 onto 1, how do I use one to block the other? Do I move between them? Do I go around the side? All that kind of stuff. So already you're beginning to get a lot more out of your training in terms of self-defense application than just squaring off with your partner and exchanging some hits. And this was one of the very first things that attracted me to Vladimir Vasilyev's work and Systema in general, was seeing the mass attack work. We'd been trying to fit the stuff that we've been learning into what was happening outside of the club, with some success. Some things worked fine, other things we felt were lacking. That's why at a point about 12 years into my training, I left that first school and I started going and learning from different teachers, which of course I couldn't do in the traditional place. So, you know, a whole wide range of things. A good friend who's a jiu-jitsu instructor, trained some stuff with him. I had other friends who were doing Singyi and Bagua and boxing, all sorts of stuff. And again, one of the most indispensable things you can have in martial arts is good people to train with from a variety of styles and backgrounds. That way you start building in that random factor into your training. Having said all that, having looked around at a lot of different things, it wasn't until I saw the Systema Mass Attack tape that I thought, right, this is something that for the first time actually looks like those situations I were in, because it was quite a small room with maybe about 30 blokes in the middle, and they're going for it. They're punching away. Yeah, that looks like a that looks like a crowd fight. It looks like a mosh pit. It looks like whatever you want to call it. And of course, once I started getting into this and presenting that sort of work, one comment I often got was, well, what's that got to do with martial arts? You know, where's the technique? Where's the stance and all the rest of it? Which I get, you know, I understand that because I went through that process myself. But this is where Systema is radically different from some other styles or other arts. I'm not seeking perfection in a particular technique or movement. I'm not seeking to preserve this this catalogue of techniques, these methods of movement, if you will. I'm not beholden to pass that on. What Systema is about is exploring yourself in terms of what is your range of motion, what are your capabilities, how are you able to best express yourself at a particular time and place. In order to do that, you need to have this freedom of movement, absolute freedom of movement, physically and psychologically, rather than be forced into adopting a very particular stance, a very particular way of moving, or whatever it is. And what you quickly find, of course, is in that environment, in a big crowd fight, you can't do that stance thing anyway. I actually remember Mikhail explaining this at a workshop, and he had a guy who was a little bit sceptical about things from a particular style. And Mikhail said, right, we'll do the mass attack, and he told the guy to get into his strong stance, and he stood in the middle, and off the crowd went. And no one was even trying to hit him or anything else, but of course he's just getting knocked all over the place. Why? Because that sort of environment is completely random. So the first thing then is work in threes rather than in pairs. The second thing is, if you've got the group for it, or even if there's 5 or 6 of you, just start doing some of that crowd work. Now, the intensity is up to you, you know. You don't have to go full bore. You can if you want, by all accounts. If you want to put some gloves on and a bit of gear and all that stuff, yeah, fine, you can do that. But even just having people moving around in that environment can be a good learning experience. Even if you do, like, you know, the Dalek drill and all this sort of stuff, you just walk with the fist outstretched. Even just doing that, because it's so random and unpredictable, is a good way to start improving your movement and awareness. Of course, then you can gradually build up to going, well, as all out as you want to, really. As long as everyone is reasonably safe at the end of the day, then, you know, everyone stays friends. What I found with this type of work is, at the end of it, everyone's laughing and clapping each other on the back. You know, it's a bit of a release sometimes for people as well. So of course then you take that principle and you apply that to all your other work, whether you're working with or against weapons, or, you know, your situational work, you're sitting down, you're in a car, whatever it is, all that kind of thing. And again, for me, Systema was the first thing I'd seen where you do work in a car, for example, or you do work with a chair. Now I notice a lot more people doing it. It's funny that, isn't it? To greater or lesser degrees of success. But again, given that random factor, not talking about being paranoid and, oh, I'm going to get attacked every time I sit in my car, but if you have that mindset of adaptability, and if you've done a little bit of practice with it, then if it happens, you're prepared for it. So just before I finish, there's one other aspect I want to quickly talk about as well when it comes to the idea of random. Because here's the thing, and I'll include myself in this, again, going from my experience. People come into martial arts because they're looking for an element of control. It might be that they've been exposed to violence. It might be that they've been bullied. It could be they're not very confident. They want to get stronger. They want to get fitter. It could be they're attracted to the ideas and philosophies behind martial arts and so on. But there is often this idea of, I want to take control of something. And martial arts are very good at giving you that feeling of control, because first thing is, you're doing your movements, you're doing your exercises. Once you get a little bit proficient, you know, you feel good. You feel good about yourself. It's a good feeling. The other thing is, of course, is your teacher says, oh yeah, well, if someone does this, then you do this, and then you do that, and you'll throw them down, or you'll lock them up, or whatever it is. And you do that in class, and you practice it, and it works after a while. Fine, you get that confidence. You feel like you're in control. The issue then comes when that bumps up against reality. And again, one memorable example of this to me was a guy who tried to pull off a high kick outside a club one night. And it was a great kick, really nice kick. Trouble was, it had been raining and it was a bit wet and he slipped. So in the school, in the club, boom, lovely kick. Outside in the wet, he went over and it didn't end well for him. So when everything is perfect, everything works. But you just throw in even just one random element, the ground's a bit slippy, and suddenly what you've done hasn't worked. Now, how you adjust for that in training is again by that mindset of, don't just practice in the same place all the time. Practice outdoors especially, practice in different conditions, practice wearing different types of clothes. And again, this is a criticism I've had, because guys turn up wearing jeans or whatever it is. Well, they don't even look like martial artists. Well, great, okay, fine. But this is what I wear. This is what I'm going to train in. You know, you should be keeping things as close to your everyday life as possible, if that is your interest. But this also spills over into the exercises as well, because of course, you know, we can't get to train with other people all the time. So a significant amount of time is spent on your own training, doing your exercises, your ground movement, your push-ups, your squats, your sit-ups, all the rest of it. I like to do work with the sledgehammer, you know, whatever you do. Again, it can be very easy to get into routines with this. And I did put a vlog up a little while ago about what my training routine is, or non-routine. So you can refer to that for more information there. But basically, it's this idea of control again. Sometimes people think because they've done 10 of this and 20 of that and 30 of that, that gives them a sort of confidence, and it may well bring, of course, benefits with it, but that doesn't necessarily always translate into real life, where you get all these random factors that you're not in control of. So again, very easy. If you're working on your own, if you just take the press ups for example, you can put the hands in different places, you can move the feet around. There's lots of things you can do with the breathing. You can hold the breath, you can extend the breathing. So many variations you can find on all just these simple movements, which I'd encourage you to explore to the full, because not only does it make your training more interesting, but of course it's making you strong, it's making you adaptable in all those different positions. Another thing you see a lot of in the system as well is taking hits, which is good, but sometimes again people can get used to taking hits when they're in control. So one end of this, you'll see people doing this kind of thing. They really push out as the partner hits. That's fine, and it's a nice way to get into it, but when we think about that on a practical level, that only works if I see the hit coming and I've got time to move into it. So if you really want to look at the random element of that, then try taking hits with your eyes closed. Physically it's the same thing, but psychologically that's a whole different ball game. And again, when you get to this type of working, that random element tends to affect you more on a psychological level than it does on the physical. And just to finish, I think we can apply this to the system as a whole, because I have seen over the years, I've been doing this for a little while now, I have seen over the years some people come and go, and sometimes they come into the system and feel it's their job to correct it. What they're generally saying is, oh, what Systema needs is me, and I'm going to show you how to do it all properly because you're doing this wrong and doing that wrong. Again, that's okay, and look, we're all up for correction, right? We're all works in progress. nothing that I do certainly is perfect, and everything can be corrected and improved, or as I like to put it, refined. We're always looking to refine our work. So that's okay to an extent, but when it becomes this idea of, well, I'm doing the proper stuff and you're not, again, that's okay. Well, show me. Let's see then. So just be careful that you're not approaching Systema with an aim to try and control it. And again, I can understand if people have had experiences or they're looking for something solid to cling on to, then they'll turn to a martial art or a form of exercise to do that. Unfortunately, with Systema, it's like grabbing a cloud. I always remember a quote from Sensei Higayama. It was on the old Way of the Warrior series, which dates me as well. I think, when did that come out? In the 70s, I think it was. And it showed him, this very nice, traditional old Japanese teacher. Every day he went into his small dojo at his house and he practiced his kata and everything else. And he said, you know, it's like trying to grab a cloud. Every time I practice, I'm trying to grab a cloud and I might get just a little bit, just a little bit. Well, I think Systema is very much the same as that. I mean, it's difficult even to describe it sometimes or to say what it is. So don't feel that you have to come into that and start putting things in boxes and say what Systema needs is this and this and this. Right, and now we're all doing it properly. It might be a process that you go through. It's probably something I went through myself. Maybe it's just a stage that we'll have to go through. But ultimately, when you come out the other side of that, you'll realise that this is a big nebulous thing because, in effect, it doesn't have a form. It doesn't have a shape. It doesn't have a syllabus. When we talk about the system as being the body systems, then you are the system. So when you sort of box things like this, all you're really doing is limiting yourself. So just to take that out into the wider aspect, as I've said before, in your everyday life, look at how you might limit yourself. Are you subject to a routine? Which of course we all are to an extent if we've got families and jobs and all the rest of it. I doubt that very many of us are sort of billionaires who can jet off into space when we feel like it, or whatever it is that billionaires get up to. I dread to think. So, you know, just look at your life and see, can I make a couple of changes here? Can I introduce a few random elements now and again? Are there places I haven't been to? Well, perhaps I'll go there, perhaps I'll do this instead of that. Just start introducing that element into your life, and I think you'll find that will help you generally to relax a little more as well and be more open. All right, so that's it for today. I'm going to say it again. As always, please do send any comments, questions, suggestions. I'd be very interested to hear your comments about this subject, providing, of course, they are intelligent and not just one word. We'll see if we'll get Mr. Garbage turn up again. You know, that's just life, right? That's life in the 21st century. But please do send your comments and questions in. And of course, if you want to access all that great instructional content on the YouTube member channel, just click that join button below and that will tell you how you can access it all. All right. Thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.